Hey guys, it's Chrissy here. In today's video I'm going to be discussing short stories. In particular, I'm going to be talking about the Caine Prize awarded to African authors. Every year they submit their stories and through a panel of judges, one of them is picked as the winner. It's a very exciting award series that I've been following since 3 years ago, and can I just mention, this video is not sponsored. I just absolutely love this short story award series and I just thought I would do a video. I think that they are a great way to get people into reading, is that they're very accessible, they're extremely cheap, or if anything for free, especially these short stories. You can find all of them on their website for free. The first short story I'm going to be talking about is Who Will Greet You at Home by Leslie Nneka Arima. She's a Nigerian author. Her story is a wonderful mix of science fiction, I guess maybe you could say a little bit of horror, dystopian definitely, and magical realism. This story is set in a random city in Nigeria. It's about a young lady who is born into a world that is still dictated by Nigeria's social pressures that are put onto women in terms of womanhood and motherhood, but does not have the same rules, i.e. in this world you don't need a man to reproduce. So instead of needing a man, women spin their babies out of any sort of material, from cotton to lace to silk to hair to glass, anything. I don't think glass is mentioned, but you know, I imagine glass as well. Why not wood, anything? So as you can tell straight away, there is a lot there to sort of play with. There's so many different ways that this story could go. And so we're introduced to our young lady who is at the bottom end of society. She's just had a very, very rough relationship with her mother and has decided to cut all ties. Now, the problem with that is this woman needs to still be associated with a woman who can bless her baby to life, because as it happens, only your mother or somebody who is a mother figure can bless your baby into flesh and bone. And so she starts working at this salon, which is a black salon, I must say, because they talk of hair extensions, but also this salon is set in a very sort of kind of like a shanty town, and so she doesn't have access to materials like silk and all that stuff which would make a pretty baby. And so as it also goes, the material that you use to spin your baby out of will dictate what your baby will be like in terms of personality and look. So for instance, if your baby is spun out of silk, all the sort of connotations that you think of silk is what your baby is going to be like. Soft, pretty, all those things. I think this paragraph really captures what the story is about, but also gives you an idea of what the writing is like. It was a joyous occasion in a young woman's life when her mother blessed life into her child. The two girls flushed and smiled with pleasure when another woman commended their handiwork. Such tight, lovely stitches, and wished them well. So in this lady's desperation to be taken seriously as a woman and to be accepted by society at large, makes a baby out of scraps of hair that have been left behind by all these women that have been to the salon. And doing that is something that would lead to catastrophic consequences. It touches on the societal and cultural pressures that women feel within an African context to have a child and to be taken seriously. This is a very exciting story that I really, really love. It is really interesting in the fact that it mixes science fiction and all those really interesting genres like dystopia that just get you thinking. The next story that I'm going to talk about is the story of the girl whose birds flew away. And this story was actually originally written in Arabic by Bashar al-Fadil, but then was later translated into English by Max Schmuckler. And this story, I think, really represents what is so beautiful about Arabic. Arabic as a language, I think, is just incredibly beautiful, and this story really captures that. The very first sentence of this story completely grips you, is that it follows a man who is, I think, unnamed, going through a busy, bustling market, which is chaotic, shabby, rowdy, but also extremely interesting to somebody with an observing eye, which luckily our protagonist is. He's also very biased and opinionated, and you get his sort of colored view of where he is. As soon as he fixates his eyes on this woman who he's absolutely enamored with, you realize that the story suddenly gains its purpose. It's very dreamy, very poetic, fast-paced, quick, beautiful, poignant, and also captivating and inviting at the same time. And this comes, I guess, as no surprise, because I found out that the author is actually a poet himself, and even the main character within the story we discover is a poet. It takes you on the journey of their friendship, gives you just enough to keep you sort of there, and then something tragic at the end does happen. I won't give that away. I guess in the end it just leaves you with quite a few questions of whether this story is an allegorical representation of some larger political views that the author might have, or perhaps you could just take away from it that it is just what it is. But considering that this man is a poet, I suspect that this story is actually making a larger commentary about something else entirely. So I would definitely encourage this to everyone. Definitely read this story. If you love poetry, I think you're definitely going to love this story. The next story that's been nominated is God's Children, A Little Broken Things, and this is by Arinze Ifeakandu, and he's also another Nigerian author. This story is written in second person pronoun. It introduces you to a character who is watching somebody play football, and he is absolutely taken by him, goes up, approaches him, and starts off a relationship. The story is essentially a love story, and love stories normally aren't that interesting because it's something that's very common and very heavily written about, but in particular these two make for a very interesting story. I will give you a little quote of how it starts, just to give you a taster of what the story feels like. You met in your second year at the stadium one cloudy evening when you played against his department. He reminded you of Dave. You walked up to him at halftime and told him that he reminded you of someone. When I first read that, I was like, oh my gosh, how bold is that? Like, well done you go for what you want. It captures you right from the beginning and also wonderfully explores our main character Lotana's internal conflicts of self-identity, of the pressures of dealing with family dynamics, and also trying to hide, I guess, this huge secret. It's one of those stories that you read and you forget that you're reading it because you get so absorbed into it. It's just heartbreaking, entertaining, personal, and explores the very fundamentals of human being. It's also quite emotional, and I think it's one of those stories that even though you don't really care about the subject topic, will definitely draw you in and make you feel some sort of empathy or even just some sort of emotion towards the character and his struggle. The next story I'm going to be talking about is The Virus by Magogodi Caine, South African author, and that's where the story is set. I think the protagonist is a Boer, and it's basically an exploration of the indifference that our main character feels towards immigrants and black people. Essentially, I think our protagonist is racist and has a lot of unlikable traits that you would associate with somebody who was a very racist Boer during the time of apartheid. It makes a social commentary on apartheid and all those themes related to that. But also, it's really interestingly written because it doesn't follow a linear pattern. It goes through a storytelling of this character and then jumps back and forth to memories that they tell you, which only serve to give you a full idea of the plot. It explores South African cyber terrorism, to be specific, immigration and history. The entire story, I guess, is mostly you going through the eyes of our protagonist and getting a very, very biased opinion of what our main character feels, and towards the end of it they have a certain awakening or realization of who they are and what their contribution is within this society. And I guess that's what makes it so interesting. To be honest, this story maybe went over my head because I actually had to read it twice. It has some Afrikaans within it, and I had to Google the Afrikaans words because I think they definitely add to the plot of the story. Reading it just without the Afrikaans would leave you feeling a little bit lost. So in some ways this story tackles a lot of heavy topics, but from a very interesting angle. If you're interested in South African politics, is something that I'd recommend. If you're somebody that's more interested in linear tellings of a story, then I don't think you would actually enjoy this story. I found it quite difficult to get into, but once you sink your teeth into it, I think it's a very interesting story. And last but not the least is Bush Baby, and this is by another Nigerian author, Chikodili Emelumadu. And Bush Baby is actually the nickname of a monkey species which makes a crying sound that sounds like a human baby. The genres of this, I guess, are fiction, horror and thriller. We follow a young lady who has just moved back from a life abroad, and she kind of makes at the beginning a social commentary on how she feels she's being treated by family members back there in Nigeria. Talks about the relationship of her and her brother, who her brother is probably the opposite of her. He's a womanizer, a gambler, an alcoholic, a drug user, and by all accounts has probably just made her life just that little bit more difficult than she hoped it would have been. The parents of both passed away, and in some ways she feels that her brother is responsible for that. She bumps into Okochukwu, who is her very much absent brother, who she only meets every so often. He looks in a very bad way. He's emaciated, and immediately she suspects that he has got himself into trouble again, which he has, only this time it involves witchcraft and some sort of magical realism stuff. It happens, I think, within the space of 2 days, and it's just them two in a room. So she recounts different events from their family past, which only serve for you to understand why these two characters are in that room facing whatever they're facing together. It's, I guess, a wonderful story that at the heart of it talks about family and familial relations. It's very much plot driven. It takes you into a journey of the narrator's perspective. It features a lot of hyperbole and also similes within it to try and give you an idea of the atmosphere that surrounds these two people. And I think another thing that's exciting about this, much like Who Would Greet You at Home, is that it has an element of science fiction and horror. It serves to shock the reader. So there you go, guys. Those are all the stories that have been nominated for this year's Caine Prize. And just to mention this, guys, another great thing that the Caine Prize have done is that they actually have readings of all of the stories, which can all be found on SoundCloud. A great thing about that is that they're all read in an accent that is from the area. So I think especially with stories that have dialect and different language woven into the story, it gives you a very different feel when you listen to the story. I hope you guys found this video exciting and engaging, and if you did, definitely comment, subscribe and like. And thank you so much to everybody who has bothered to do all of those things on my previous videos and still continues to follow my journey. I definitely really appreciate it. Please continue to engage with me because I absolutely love doing this. And thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.